Afternoon, all. Welcome. I want to welcome our witnesses. Thank you so very much for joining us today. We've got a very important hearing here. It's on energy, it's on installations and environmental programs. So we're going to cover a lot of what all of you need to do and what the military needs to do today. It's an important part of our work. So the meeting is called. I call to order this hearing of the Readiness Subcommittee of the Armed Services Committee. Today's witnesses oversee a wide range of programs of considerable interest to this subcommittee. The last several NDAAs have included significant reforms on issues related to installation resiliency, privatized military family housing, the treatment of emerging contaminants, sustainment of military infrastructure, energy resiliency, and climate change. Today, we will receive testimony from the witnesses on the department's progress in executing these reforms. Of these topics, I'm particularly focused on two main areas. First, the chronic failure of the military departments to adequately maintain quality of life infrastructure, such as barracks, dormitories, child development centers. For years, I've sat in these hearings and listened to you or your predecessors across multiple administrations tell us that you have chosen to take risks to the detriment of our service members by underfunding, undermaintaining, and delaying recapitalization of quality of life infrastructure. Well, you may be comfortable with the risks. We are not. Over the years, you have told us that barracks and child development centers just don't compete well in the budget. Well, the inadequate annual investments does not match the lip service from your service secretaries about the importance of service members and their families. In the FY22 NDAA, we just plain got tired of waiting for you and your predecessors to make good on your promise to make service members a priority and take some of your ability to take the risk away. The fiscal 22 NDAA forces the military departments to allocate a fixed percentage of the facilities sustainment and renovation funds to unaccompanied housing. Combined with the nearly annual congressional plus-ups of the related budget lines, the forced emphasis on these facilities should start remedying a problem which you have proven to be incapable of fixing on your own. I know it will require adjustments in your thinking, but I'm confident that your operational needs will continue to compete favorably while our service members finally start to see relief from the poor and failing conditions that they have been forced to endure. Now, my second focus is on the issues of resiliency and energy demand reduction. While there are those of us that believe mitigating climate change is an end in of itself, the idea that the measures of demand reduction are inherently detrimental to our readiness and lethality is simply not true. The danger of this false dichotomy prevents us from taking action necessary to address the problem of climate change. It's now time for a clear-eyed look at how to evolve our platforms and our installations to succeed in an environment of near-peer competition. We know that demand reduction is necessary to address our contested logistical challenges, both in the Pacific and with that oceanic tyranny of distance and in the more terrestrial areas of operation. This was true in the Pacific in World War II, and as all of us are watching this issue play out in Ukraine with Russian convoys that are learning their own lesson about the tyranny of distance and supply demand. While supply is part of the answer, it can only take us so far. Logistic lines will always be targeted, and tactical vehicles that use less fuel will help us lengthen the tether our fighting forces have to resupply and extend their reach on-station time. I applaud the Army. for its recently released climate strategy that seeks to transition our tactical fleet away from a sole reliance on fossil fuels, and look forward to hearing more, not only from the Army, but from all of you on how you will execute the Army's vision and your own vision while remaining the world's premier fighting force. Installation resiliency remains a key focus to ensure our military bases can continue to perform their critical missions in the wake of natural disasters or disruptions to the electrical grid. I strongly support the department's transition to non-tactical electric vehicles. Not only will those vehicles lower the department's carbon footprint, but if we pair them with the right support infrastructure, they can become another source of resilient power for critical missions. I look forward to hearing about the department's progress on energy and water master plans, as well as for the full installation master plans, which we mandated in fiscal 20 NDAA. Finally, we must look at our critical missions outside of the continental United States as well. One of the most extreme examples of the need for effective climate and energy resiliency planning can be found at the Kwajalein Atoll. The atoll is already experiencing sea level rise fueled by high surf that will lead to increasingly frequent overwash events that destroy freshwater supplies and infrastructure on the atoll. This is not a concern of the distant future, but this is a concern now and will certainly be in the days ahead. By 2030, it'll be a constant problem. In addition, although Kwajalein is almost completely dependent on outside liquid fuel sources for energy, nothing has been done to increase conservation and resiliency to mitigate that vulnerability. This is but one example. With the critical missions performed on Kwajalein, these two issues combine to make it a compelling test case for installation resiliency master planning and readiness focused on energy conservation measures. I look forward to the hearing, to the witnesses, to their testimony, and to their discussion about their work in these critical areas, as well as providing an update on these and the myriad of other topics of mutual interest over the next 2 hours. And with that, I turn to our ranking member, our new ranking member, Congressman Mike Walsh of Florida. Mike, welcome. I look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses today for our hearing to discuss MILCON, environmental energy programs, as well as the basin facility accounts. And I think I'd speak for all of us in that we all wish we could have this important conversation after reviewing the President's budget request for FY23, but I look forward to follow up with you after it's released. But even without the budget request, I appreciate the opportunity to address and have a conversation with you about these challenges. And for too long, the services have kicked the can, frankly, down the road, failing to prioritize important investments in aging and failing infrastructure. We're seeing years and years of deferred maintenance that have made facilities inefficient or even incapable of supporting their intended mission, which has negatively impacted readiness and retention. The very real consequences of this are on display with the recent fuel leak at the Red Hill bulk storage facility in Hawaii that has now led to the decision to close that facility. While I personally support the defueling of Red Hill, I am particularly concerned that the department's long-term plan to remediate Red Hill could weaken our national security. We cannot allow our national security to atrophy because of a deficient and expedient planning process, and we have to strike that balance. Failure to modernize and maintain our facilities will make them less sustainable for the future because they will be either less resilient or potentially more vulnerable to risks like extreme weather events. I'm also particularly concerned about the lack of emphasis on our soldiers and sailors. It is imperative that we provide safe barracks free from mold and mildew. I also look forward to understanding options for Navy and Air Force to adopt the Army's privatization of lodging initiative that thus far, my understanding, has been demonstrated to have about a 20% savings. Being from Florida, I am certainly aware of the challenges of sea level rise and extreme weather, and the challenges they pose to our installations, to our people, and to our mission. We can prepare our military installations at home and abroad for future challenges with better planning that focuses on resilient infrastructure investments. We have made progress to this end for certain by requiring master plans to consider these risks, but we have more work to do. Our installations also remain largely dependent on commercial electric grids, as I've discussed with each of you, and are vulnerable to any disruptions that those commercial grids may suffer. So to protect our mission capability, I hope we continue to pursue solutions like islanding capabilities and generation from microreactors. I also wanted to express my dismay at our European force structure's failure, and I think it's been an absolute failure from a deterrent standpoint to dissuade Russian aggression. It is obvious that our forces in Germany, it's obvious to me at least, that our forces in Germany should be relocated further east to Romania, Poland, and the Baltic states. Additionally, such forward basing should be done on a permanent, not a temporal basis. And finally, we need to ensure our European force structure is not reliant on Russian oil and gas. It is time to restructure our European force posture to this new reality. On the operational side, I am concerned the department is not as far along as we should be, given the threats on the horizon. We must be able to supply energy forward and sustain operations in contested environments. I certainly have a sad and tragic personal experience with soldiers and Marines that would be alive today if we weren't carting so much fuel across contested supply lines. These contested and challenged environments for our logistics will be the new normal. And this will require us to shed old approaches. The Chinese Communist Party is prioritizing supply chain disruption. It's a key part of their strategy. We cannot and we can no longer afford to admire the problem, to have hearings like this to talk about the problem without meaningful action. And I certainly expect and hope you'll come to this committee for the resources you need for those solutions. Energy demand also requires attention and better coordination within the department as we develop future systems. The services must work with acquisition teams up front to drive efficiency at all levels. I understand that President Biden has made climate change a national priority, but we cannot sacrifice the capabilities that our men and women in uniform need. DOD has published their climate action plan. Last year, the services are beginning to roll out their own. And as these initiatives turn into actions, they turn into programs, we must maintain a mission-first mindset. We must stay focused on winning wars. And we must keep that mindset with solutions that are cost-effective, efficient, and realistic. So look, as global events like the invasion of Ukraine and Russian hostilities against Ukraine, the growing threat of China have made clear we must make smart investments. We're running out of time, and the warfighter must come first. Finally, the FY22 NDA authorized a historic level of spending for the cleanup of PFAS in contaminated military installations surrounding areas. We all hope to see that momentum continued. A lot of good work has been done, but I'd appreciate an update on the efforts underway to replace AFFF and their efforts to reduce accidental releases. Again, I want to thank you all for coming, for appearing today. I look forward to our discussion. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walsh. I concur in everything that you laid out there. I'm now going to turn to our witnesses. I'll introduce all four of them and then call on Mr. Kramer to be first. Mr. Paul Kramer is the Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy Installations and Environment, Office of the Secretary of Defense. Mr. Paul Farnham is the Acting Assistant Secretary of the Army for Energy Installations and Environment, the Department of Army. The Honorable Meredith Berger is the Assistant Secretary of Navy for Energy Installations, and Environment at the Department of Navy. Mr. Edwin Oshiba is the Acting Assistant Secretary of Air Force for Energy Installations and Environment at the Department of Air Force. I now call on Mr. Kramer for his testimony. Mr. Kramer.
Thank you, Chairman Garamendi, and to Ranking Member Waltz. Distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of myself and my service colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Department's energy, installations, and environment programs. Our priorities address mission requirements, ensure service members have a safe and resilient place to live and work, and also begin to address installation resilience challenges. We are committed to protecting our personnel and their families using a robust, all-hazards approach that addresses the wide range of natural and man-made threats. For example, DoD is building upon our long track record of addressing PFAS issues, responsibly following the science and the direction of Congress. As you know, the DoD PFAS Task Force was established in July 2019 to provide strategic direction to ensure a holistic approach on the Department's efforts to address PFAS. The strong interagency collaboration of the Department is well-structured and, thanks to Congress, well-resourced. We are well-positioned to eliminate the use of current AFFF with several agents performing well in initial testing. We are continuing to evaluate these agents to determine toxicity and identify engineering challenges related to transitioning equipment to a new formulation. We have also expanded our efforts through outreach on a quarterly basis to talk to communities that are affected by PFAS. And these are hosted by senior officials. As part of these events, we solicit questions and provide responses that are posted on our DoD PFAS website. In addition, we are updating our existing website with installation-specific data while developing a more robust, interactive, and user-friendly website. The Department continues to focus on ensuring that service members have access to safe, quality, affordable family and unaccompanied housing. With regard to privatized housing, the Department continues to prioritize actions that improve the tenant experience and rebuild tenant trust. Our initial phase was predominantly focused on implementing the updated MHPI Tenant Bill of Rights, which was published on August 1st, 2021, and the requirements embedded in these rights are now being implemented. The Department has issued all policy guidance necessary to implement all rights at all MHPI projects. With few exceptions, all 18 tenant rights are now available. Finally, the Department depends on resilient installations. To prepare for peer competition, where even the homeland is contested, the Department is addressing a range of technological, operational, and policy initiatives to enhance the use of energy in warfighting. We have seen firsthand the effects climate and severe weather has had on our installations. To that end, we released the DoD Climate Adaptation Plan to guide DoD activities and investments to enable operations to continue under changing conditions, while also preserving operational capability and enhancing the natural and man-made systems essential to the Department's success. We released the Defense Climate Assessment Tool to enable installation leaders and planners to understand consistent exposure assessments and identify regions or installations for additional climate-related studies. We are prioritizing investments in both installation energy and operational energy. This includes investments in the Energy Resilient and Conservation Investment Program, Readiness, Environmental Protection Integration Program, and our research and development programs. We appreciate Congress and specifically this subcommittee's continued support as we work together to provide the best support possible to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Guardians, and their families. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kramer. I'm now going to turn to Mr. Farnham, who is setting, well, the word you military folks like to use, the pacing threat. I'll say this is the pacing challenge. Mr. Farnham, if you could explain to us what the Army is doing with regard to your energy and climate adaptation model.
Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Waltz, members of the subcommittee. On behalf of the soldiers, families, and civilians of the United States Army, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the contributions made through the installation, energy, and environment portfolio to overall Army readiness. The Army foundational priorities of people, readiness, and modernization guide our strategies and investments. Secretary Wormuth recognizes that the Army's greatest strength, most valuable asset, and most important weapon system is our people. At the core of our installation's mission is the support for the training, education, work, and the lives of our soldiers and families. The Army's mission is to fight and win the nation's wars. This begins at our installations. Power projection in any future conflict will occur from a contested homeland. Installation resiliency will be the critical enabler to allow us to conduct our operations under these conditions, as well as to continue operations following extreme weather events. Last month, we published the Army Climate Strategy, which enables our force to effectively operate in a climate-altered world. It increases the capabilities of the force, and it modernizes and increases the resilience of our installations. Installation resiliency will be greatly enhanced through such measures as on-site renewable generation, battery storage, and microgrids, enabling the Army to self-sustain our critical missions and making us less dependent on a vulnerable electric grid. On the operational side, greater fuel efficiency of our tactical vehicles will increase our capabilities by extending the range of our combat forces while simultaneously reducing the vulnerability and burden on supply lines. Hybridizing our combat vehicles will allow for silent overwatch, reducing the acoustic and thermal signature of our platforms, thus reducing the threat to our soldiers. These measures will protect our soldiers and will increase their capabilities on the battlefield. The Army Climate Strategy will enhance the Army's ability to accomplish our core mission of fighting and winning the nation's wars. As the Army transitions to carbon-free energy, a primary focus will be on ensuring and increasing the resiliency of our installations. In this effort, we will seek partnerships with local utilities, with industry, and other willing partners. We will use every authority and tool available to us to modernize our installations while being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. One such tool is the Energy Savings Performance Contract, which enables us to increase our efficiency with no upfront cost to the Army. We recognize the importance of this tool as a key component of our overall energy strategy, and we are committed to continuing and expanding its use. The Army's greatest strength and most valuable asset is our people, and the efforts we take to sustain and invest in our installations directly support our people and their quality of life. Our soldiers and families deserve high-quality, safe housing. That has been and will remain a priority for our senior leadership. The Army has made significant progress implementing reforms to enhance our oversight of privatized housing and to hold companies accountable. The Army has fully implemented the Tenant Bill of Rights at all of our installations with privatized housing, providing soldiers and their families negotiating power with the private companies that own and manage military housing. We're also addressing the challenges with our unaccompanied housing. We have invested $2.4 billion in barracks over the last 3 years and will continue these investments into the future. Another important component to taking care of people is ensuring access to quality and affordable child care. The Army is building and expanding child care centers that will increase our capacity by over 4,000 spaces by 2026. Where on-base child care is not available, the Army is taking steps to provide subsidies for child care in the local community. Through our environmental programs, the Army will remain a good steward of the land where we work, train, drill, and live. The Army is responsible for 13.6 million acres of land, and we will continue to work with federal and state agencies to ensure we comply with all environmental regulations and safeguards to protect the health of the community and the environment for the American people. Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Waltz, members of the subcommittee, thank you for your continued support for our soldiers, civilians, and families. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Secretary Farnham. And I want to also now turn to Assistant Secretary Meredith Berger from the U.S. Navy, and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Waltz, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the Department of the Navy's Energy, Installations, and Environment portfolio. Since August, I've been honored to serve as the Assistant Secretary, and I'm proud to lead a team of dedicated Marines, sailors, and civilians who contribute to the important work of making our Navy and Marine Corps the best fighting force the world has ever known. Each day, we enable readiness through modernized and climate-ready installations, unrivaled testing and training ranges, resilient facilities and operations, safe and healthy conditions for our people, and stewardship of the environment as a strategic asset. At the top of the Department of Navy's priorities is the expansion of the Fallon Training Range. With the expansion of this unique range, we'll be able to ensure that we train like we fight, a critical readiness imperative. I had the chance to visit Fallon in October. I saw firsthand the value that it brings and where we fall short without expansion. I met with the community there and learned about the importance of the land, about the strong, proud, present history and heritage of the tribes who live there. The department remains committed to working with all stakeholders to find a viable path to expansion of the range, and I look forward to working with this subcommittee to move this important initiative forward. I also look forward to working with you on living conditions and quality of life for our sailors, Marines, and their families, something that I view as foundational to the readiness of our force and an area in which I'm grateful for your persistent attention. We have a lot of work to do, and a most recent reminder of that are the issues uncovered at Bethesda. However, we've also made some progress. We're beginning to see sustained improvement in the operation, maintenance, and customer service in the privatized housing. I've had the opportunity to visit Navy and Marine installations, and I've seen commanding officers involved in housing issues. I've seen the housing advocates in action. I've talked to residents, and I've gotten their feedback. We will continue to apply lessons learned to provide our service members and their families all that they deserve. I look forward to working with you on climate change. It's a destabilizing force, exacerbating other national security concerns, and posing serious readiness challenges. Our naval forces are in the crosshairs of the climate crisis. The threat increases in stability and demands on our forces, while simultaneously impacting our capacity to respond to those demands. For that reason, for Navy and Marine Corps, climate readiness is mission readiness. Mitigation and adaptation to increase our resilience is an operational imperative. With those guiding factors in mind, we will soon release our climate strategy. Lastly, you don't need to look any further than today's headlines to know that energy can be used as a weapon. And it is for that reason that the Department of Navy is focused on reliable energy sources. Our installations are essential shore platforms from which our naval forces train, deploy, and maintain forward presence. Their access to reliable energy ensures the success of the department's mission-critical infrastructure in our readiness pipeline. For that reason, we are grateful for and continue to focus on the energy authorities that advance and preserve our mission readiness. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Now I turn to Acting Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, Edwin Oshiba. Mr. Oshiba, your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Waltz, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today and provide updates to the Department of the Air Force's installation, energy, and environment priorities. Our nation faces an array of complex challenges to include the continued rise of competition with pacing adversaries across multiple domains, intensifying rates of technology change, and fiscal pressure. Additionally, we continue to experience the growing strength and frequency of extreme weather events, which, unmitigated, endanger our airmen, guardians, their families, and our installations and critical infrastructure. In addressing these challenges, the department continues to orient our infrastructure priorities in line with the interim National Security Strategic Guidance and National Defense Strategy. Coupled with the department's guiding principle of one team, one fight, we can and will overcome these challenges and provide installations which underpin our nation's security. Accordingly, we view our installations as foundational to enabling and projecting combat power in air, space, and cyberspace. The department remains committed to ensuring they are ready by investing in the right capabilities at the right time, in the right place, with a diverse, inclusive team of trained and equipped airmen and guardians. Resilient against natural and man-made threats, and balanced to be effective, efficient, and optimally postured. Since 2019, the department's infrastructure investment strategy has guided our efforts to make our installations ready and resilient through decisions meant to balance effectiveness and efficiency. The strategy informs policy and investment decisions supporting weapon system modernization and combatant command priorities while balancing the need to recapitalize our aging infrastructure and facilities which improve the quality of work and life for our airmen, guardians, and their families. Our strategy also emphasizes adoption of smarter business practices by investing at the optimum point in facility life cycles, identifying smarter acquisition methods, strengthening installation planning, and leveraging partnerships and third-party investment. Finally, we continue to implement installation and operational energy resiliency initiatives which harden our infrastructure against a myriad of threats and significantly reduce energy consumption. We are cognizant that changing climate and severe weather events have and will continue to severely impact our installations and the missions they enable. Climate change effects are accelerating, and the time for action is now. The department is on the cusp of releasing its Climate Action Plan, aligned with our operational imperatives to enhance resiliency and readiness while balancing mission effectiveness and fiscal efficiency. It will lay out priorities and actionable objectives to address the challenges of a changing climate through improving operational energy efficiency, enhancing installation resilience, diversifying energy sources, and developing a climate-literate force. We continue to emphasize continued quality of life investments in housing, dormitories, child development centers, and other support facilities is one of our top priorities. This underscores the need to balance operational priorities with preserving the readiness and resilience of our most important resource, our airmen and guardians. We appreciate Congress investing in 5 additional child development center projects in fiscal year 2022's budget, and we will work toward unaccompanied housing investments in compliance with the FY22 NDAA. Additionally, the department is committed to ensuring our privatized housing projects provide safe, quality, well-maintained housing for all airmen, guardians, and their families. With the help of Congress, our project owners have agreed to adopt the Tenant Bill of Rights, and we added over 200 government housing management positions to maintain our focus on improved oversight, long-term project health, and sustainment of the privatized housing inventory. Finally, we remain firmly committed to executing robust environmental programs and protecting human health. Regarding PFAS, no one on or off our installations is drinking water with PFOS and PFOA concentrations above the EPA lifetime health advisory attributable to our operations. We developed a robust framework to identify and remediate impacted areas within our legal authorities and remediate impacted areas within our legal authorities. We will also continue to proactively communicate and partner with local communities, state and federal agencies, and elected officials at all levels in addressing this issue. In summary, the Department of the Air Force is committed to preserving ready, resilient installations, our platforms to enable and project combat power, using a strategy which balances operational effectiveness and resource efficiency as part of a broader one team to win our one fight. Chairman Garamendi and Ranking Member Waltz, thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oshiba. We're now going to turn to questions, but before I do, without objection, the written testimony supplied by the witnesses will be entered into the record. Without objection, so ordered. Also, any written testimony from any of the members that is available through the course, without objection, that too will be entered into the record. Moving on, as I said a moment ago, the pacing seems to be from the Army right here, having put forth its climate strategy. I'd like to first begin with the Army for a fuller explanation of how that climate strategy affects the 3 fundamental issues of this hearing: energy, the installations themselves, and then the environment. So, Mr. Farman, if you would go into that in some depth and detail, I would appreciate it. Let's just say you got about 5 minutes to do that. Have at it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on the installation front, the goal of the climate strategy will actually increase the resilience of our installations. As I've said in my opening statement, We believe that any future war will be fought from a contested homeland. So the Army's mission to project our forces to the overseas battlefield will first have to deal with the contested homeland. So the fight will start at the installations. Whether it's a natural disaster or a non-kinetic cyber attack on the grid, we need our installations to be able to maintain power to continue our missions to project our forces. The climate strategy lays out steps with renewable energy generation that's self-contained on the base, using battery storage, tying everything together with microgrids, so that in the event of a grid failure, our installations, mission-critical systems on our installations will still be powered and will still be able to operate and accomplish our mission. This also carries forward to the operational forces. The tactical vehicles, hybridizing them, and eventually, over the course of the next decade or two, getting to fully electric tactical vehicles. Fuel on the battlefield means long supply lines, and as Ranking Member Waltz put, I share your concern about the safety of our service members protecting those fuel lines. If we can reduce the amount of fuel that our forces need on the front lines, we can reduce the burden on our logistics lines. That also carries forward to our contingency basis. In the climate strategy, we clearly say that we're going to put out a contingency basing policy that will call for the requirement and the standardization of all forward contingency bases, requiring the most efficient structures, requiring the most efficient generators, tying those generators together with microgrids to ensure they run at their peak efficiency, pairing them with battery storage to increase their efficiency even more, using portable renewable generation to further reduce the fuel load. We're looking at every possible way to reduce the fuel burden that burdens our soldiers. And then on the environment, climate change is affecting the Army already. It's affecting our installations. Severe storms, wildfires, they're threatening not just the physical part of the installation, but they're also threatening the health and safety of our soldiers and families. And it's also impacting our operations. There's an increasing need for a permanent Arctic force. There's also an increasing need for defense support to civil authority missions, which is basically supporting disaster response operations here at home. So everything that we're doing is being impacted by the climate. This climate strategy will do two things. One, it will better enable the Army to operate in a changing environment, and it will also do our part to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions to help mitigate the effects of climate change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Foreman. And now for detail about the U.S. Navy with regard to its energy installations and environmental and your upcoming climate strategy. I'm particularly interested on the installation side of it. How will you be able to, aside from the Fallon training range, which you've already discussed, could you also discuss other installations, particularly those that are impacted by rising sea level as well as storms? Ms. Berger, if you would carry forth.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, everything that we are thinking about is very mission driven. And so as we think about where we see impact, you are exactly right. It is where we're seeing sea level rise, where we are seeing the impact of storms on our ability for our installations to withstand impact. So while we are in the final stages of preparing our climate strategy, what we are doing is implementing a lot of these good practices. Ranking Member Waltz mentioned islanding. The Marine Corps is actually a great example of places that we have seen success with islanding and other energy resilience. And so at Yuma, at Miramar, and also at Parris Island, we have been able to set up an energy infrastructure that allows those installations to run for actually 14 days on their own, to be able to island, to be able to distribute load, because of exactly what Mr. Farnan was saying. If you need to have these installations running on their own, if this is a space that we are fighting from, we need to make sure that they are resilient and able to move forward. So that is one place that we have seen some success, and that is a resilience that'll be something that's very important for us to be able to operate. Sea level rise, of course, Norfolk is a primary example of that. I was able to visit Norfolk as one of the first places that I went when I came into my job, and there is flooding that is happening there that is impacting even the most basic of our ability of our Navy service members to be able to operate. They can't bring their kids to school. And if they can't bring their kids to school, then they cannot get to work. If they are not getting to work, then they cannot get there to train. And so when we talk about readiness as a comprehensive approach, this is family readiness, this is service member readiness, this is the ability to fight, and if necessary, win. And so at every point that we take a step backwards because of these impacts, we are not able to be as ready as possible.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Oshiba, if you'll take the same set of questions and go into more detail about what the Air Force is doing to address the climate crisis and how you intend to fix the problems.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like we mentioned, we are on the cusp of publishing our climate action plan, and we took a lot of good ideas and lessons learned from the Army and the other service members, and also took this opportunity to really document some of the ongoing actions that we have taken up to this point. We have been moving out on installation energy plans now for the last couple of years. We've published 42 to date. We have 16 more that we have planned for this fiscal year, and it's focused upon resiliency measures for our installations around 5 key areas: robustness, resourcefulness, redundancy, response, and recovery. And in many cases, I think covers many of the different aspects that both of my colleagues have already mentioned on the installation space. Another big area that we have started to make some progress on is we've conducted these energy resilience and readiness exercises at our installations, or what we call pull-the-plug exercises. And the idea there is to understand where our vulnerabilities is in terms of energy sources so that we can apply fixes to those vulnerabilities should that time come when we are disconnected from the grid. That helps to inform our planning moving forward in the upcoming years and ensure that the right investments are made at the right places to mitigate those vulnerabilities. And then the last area to cover is some exciting things we were doing in the operational energy realm. There has been some work that's been going on over the last couple of years in testing drag reduction technologies, primarily for our mobility and refueling assets, things like microvanes and winglets that allow us to extend the range of our assets that provides operational reach with fewer assets and what we call create more, if you will, loiter time to refuel our fighter assets once they're in that their refueling tracks. So those are things that are being tested at the moment. We'll capture all of those things in our climate action plan and really look forward to some exciting things coming up in the future.
Yeah. If I might follow along, Mr. Oshiba, what you just raised, in your written testimony, you went into some detail about the structures themselves and the new building codes that are being implemented, specifically at Tyndall and at Offutt, 2 Air Force bases that were severely impacted by a hurricane and flooding. I'm not going to take into detail now in this hearing the issues of the building codes and conservation in the buildings themselves, installation and the like. But I want to get into detail with you, and I want to also take this up with the other departments with regard to installations building codes. For the Navy, you might think about earthquake building codes and China Lake. For the Army, you might want to think about deep freezes. For the Air Force, the same way. So we want to deal with that. For all of you, the principal purpose of this hearing is to develop the necessary changes, authorities, and prioritization for the upcoming NDAA. So we're going to drill down deeply at the staff level and with other communications with each of the departments so that we can structure the NDAA to fully address the challenges that you face. With that, I now turn to Mr. Walsh. Following Mr. Walsh's questions, for which he has an unlimited amount of time, I'll turn to Mr. Kalehi, who is next on the gavel list. So, Mr. Walsh, your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try not to abuse that blank slate there, but Ms. Berger, you mentioned, I think rightly, that, and I agree, that energy is being used as a weapon right now. And we're seeing that on the headlines of all of our news feeds around the world. My concern, despite that fact, is that our bases in Europe are dependent and they're vulnerable. Our bases in Europe are just as dependent on Russian oil and gas as Europeans are. And I realize that we have a certain dependency on the host nation, but I think Secretary Kramer, because I think this is a broader issue, I'll go your way, this is more of an OSD issue. What steps are you taking? What steps is the department taking to eliminate or at least significantly reduce our European bases from our addiction to Russian gas?
So thank you, Ranking Member, for that question. Yeah, so it's a complex answer, as we discussed and you mentioned here, is we are dependent and reliant on the host nation, regardless whether it's in Germany, Italy, and the Pacific, for that fuel source. Because even if we ran our own, we would still have to use that same source. And so what the priority within the department is to build resilience, to reduce that hazard, so you have multiple sources of power, not relying on one source of power. So we've really emphasized over the last few years microgridding, so that we can create grids within grids and not rely on that. Alternate sources of fuels where we have install renewables, and to the extent that we can't work any of those to have some redundant system to continue to operate, we're going to get into the point where we're going to produce our own electricity. And
so within that, so for example, the Army's laid out in their strategy their intent to put microgrids in. Are we prioritizing European theater bases, or are we prioritizing home station? How are you shifting, or are you shifting your priorities across the department, but also within the Army, given what we're seeing and given that this has really caught a lot of people? Well, it shouldn't have caught them off guard, but we're seeing it front and center. I mean, the Germans have gotten religion. We should too.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, we've done planning. I'll leave it up to the Army to talk about Army bases, same as the Air Force in Europe. They've done a lot of work too. But we have emphasized microgridding in the URSIP program, the MILCON-like program, and we've got a lot of flexibility to use those funds to build overseas. It's not just CONUS-based. So we see hazard that we cannot mitigate through any other means. Consumption is another one I didn't mention earlier, but at the end of the day, part of reducing reliance is just use less. So we got to get conservation in that, and I'll turn it over to the Army if they want to speak.
Yes, sir, we agree. We do have to look at what bases and in what order we're implementing all this. As we put together our implementation plan for the strategy, certainly the power projection platforms here in the U.S. are a priority. Given the events, recent events, we do need to relook at how we are prioritizing our overseas installations, dealing with all the issues that Mr. Kramer has said. But as we build out our strategy, we're going to put the prioritizations in there, and it will include relooking at how we're going to prioritize our European installations.
When do you think that implementation plan will be complete?
We are looking. This is March. By June, by middle of June, we're hoping to have it out. We're looking at about a 90-day plan.
Okay, great. Just while we're talking about the climate strategy, I worry that the timelines included, how those timelines included overlay with mission capability, right? I mean, are we producing the most effective, the most lethal vehicles for our soldiers in the world? How are we prioritizing that with carbon emission? Number one. Number two, my other concern is obviously as we move to an all-electric, or your strategy aspires to move to an all-electric fleet, while that may be good for the climate, I don't disagree with that, I worry that the Chinese control 90% of the world's lithium, cobalt, graphite. They have truly gobbled up and created a dependency with those supply chains, not to mention the fact that the way they do their mining is some of the most abusive and polluting in the world. So where, I was looking through it last night, where in the strategy do you onshore those capabilities or secure those supply chains if we're going to have, in the next 15 years, our non-tactical and then eventually our tactical fleet go all electric?
Yes, sir. So In the climate strategy, the Army's core mission of fighting and winning the wars, nothing in the strategy will detract from that. We believe it actually enhances our ability to do so. Every step we take, every plan we make, we're going to do everything very methodically and deliberately and ensure that nothing we do detracts from the capabilities of our soldiers on the battlefield or reduces the protection of our soldiers. So as we plan this out, certainly a lot of the technologies aren't developed yet. We're going to work with industry on the RDT&E front to advance these technologies over the next decade or two. That's why the tactical vehicle electrification timelines are so long, feeding out into the 2030s and beyond.
Just at risk, sorry, just at risk, I don't want to take up too much time. We produce oil and gas here in the United States. Those supply lines are secure. The critical minerals to produce an all-electric fleet are not secure. So, can you assure me we will have secured those supply chains before we make this transition? Because otherwise, you're leaving us incredibly vulnerable.
So, sir, as we make the transition, just like the rest of society, the Army has the same issues with supply lines and the constraints that we're under. How we move forward on this, like I said, we're going to make sure that everything we do, nothing will detract from our capabilities. We will work with industry to figure out how we can ensure those supply lines. We look forward to working with the committee and with the Congress as a whole to find solutions to these problems as we move forward.
Ranking Member, if you don't mind, I'd
Sure.
kind of emphasize some of that. So while we're not talking about the 23 budget, we have talked within the department about onshoring some of those rare earth minerals at the interagency level. So it is a priority within this administration to do that onshoring. Is it going to, magically appear that we've figured out how to work through our environmental regulations, everything that's stacked up over the years? No, but it is a priority, and we're going to start knocking some of those down. And
I think you would find enthusiastic support here with this
yes,
committee.
absolutely. That's why I want to make sure that,
Chairman, but at least for myself.
yeah, make sure that you know that we are looking through those onshoring, recycling of the current batteries. That's another, area that we can get rare earth minerals out of batteries as they get end of life. And so we're investing heavily in that analysis to help us, overcome some of the supply chain vulnerabilities.
I just hope those solutions will be in place before we transition a fleet and find ourselves vulnerable.
Yeah,
This last question, Mr. Chairman, and really this is all our witnesses, but I'll start with you, Mr. Kramer. Obviously, hypersonics are a critical issue and will be critical to the future flight. The concern is are we prepared as we should be here at home when it comes to the availability of ranges and areas for 5th and 6th generation weapons? And what challenges do you face in the path forward to having ranges and testing facilities that can support the next gen? How can we help?
So from the OSD level, we're making sure that we have our policies and procedures in place to allow that. That individual, I'll let the military departments talk about ranges specifically because that's in their purview, but we're making sure that through our clearinghouse that we've set the priorities so that we can expand ranges, overflight, and we're working through those issues as they come up. And so to date, we've not had a lot of issues that bubbled up to the OSD level because I think we're still in the nascent phase of that. And I'll turn it over.
I'll just open it up if anybody wants to make sure they highlight anything for the committee.
Yes, sir. So I can't speak to a specific system, but what I can say is that we work very closely with our G3, and as they're looking forward to any future weapon systems where the basing and the training is going to be held, we lay out our budget process and our planning process to ensure we're tied with them so that we are ready as the systems come online.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walsh. You've correctly identified a set of problems, and we will be pursuing that set of problems. I will point out that the administration's policy is Buy America, Make It in America. That also extends to key allies being able to provide the critical ingredients for future electrification. And those certainly Australia being one, and other allies around the world that can augment our own domestic supply for rare earth, but one example. We can go into that in more detail, and we will, and you're absolutely correct that this entire strategy doesn't work if we're depending upon Russia for oil and gas in Europe or rare earth materials from China. So that is part of the administration's overarching policy on make it in America, buy America. I'm now going to turn to Mr. Clay, who is the next up on the gavel order. Mr. Clay.
Mahalo, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and mahalo to our witnesses for appearing here today. I also like to extend personal thanks to Secretary Berger for personally coming to Hawaii back in December, reaching out to me and other members of the delegation and the community. And I'd like to address the #1 military issue in the state of Hawaii today, and that is Kapukaki, otherwise known as Red Hill. A difficult but necessary decision by Secretary Austin to defuel Red Hill within the next 12 months and permanently close the facility is one that I fully support. It's the right decision, and I commend him for his leadership, as well as Admiral Aguilino, Admiral Paparo, General Flynn, and everyone else in Hawaii moving heaven and earth to secure this 80-year-old World War II era facility that has outlived its useful life, while also restoring safe, clean drinking water to the people of Oahu and the almost 100,000 military service members and their families who depend on the Navy's water system every single day. Although I respect opening comments from the ranking member from Florida, I don't think that many of my colleagues in Congress and many on this committee fully understand the complexity of the ongoing crisis at Red Hill. Fresh, clean drinking water is national security, and it's imperative to readiness. Without it, we severely affect the operational capability and readiness of Indo-PACOM, USARPAC, PAC Fleet, PACAF, and MARFOR PAC, all of which are within a 5-mile radius of the leaking Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility, where over 100 million gallons of fuel sit 100 feet above one of Oahu's main water aquifers. On February 11th, I introduced the Red Hill Watershed and Aquifer VI Act, a bill that spells out a number of Navy responsibilities in addition to defueling and permanently shutting down the facility. I have 2 questions for Secretary Berger. I believe that the Navy should retain ownership of the Red Hill facility and remain responsible for the long-term environmental condition of the property. There is still a high probability that a petroleum plume exists in the aquifer and that thousands of gallons of fuel are still unaccounted for as we speak. In the Red Hill VI Act, it would be the Navy's responsibility to continue conducting hydrology studies and to invest in a permanent water treatment facility and water quality testing facility at Red Hill. And so my question to either Mr. Kramer or Secretary Berger, do you support a Department of Defense investment in a permanent water treatment facility and water quality testing facility at Red Hill that would alleviate the sending of water samples to the mainland and the delay in that response time for those tests that we do?
Representative Kahele, it's nice to see you, and thank you again for the time that we got to spend together. And it was particularly meaningful to have some time to spend with Native Hawaiian organization leaders as well. So I appreciate that very much. To your question, first, we're grateful because we did get a little bit of funding to look into the planning for long-term water quality testing and maintenance and health. And as you and I have talked about, it is the top priority of the Department of Navy to make sure that we are taking care of the water, taking care of the environment, taking care of people. I want to assure you and the rest of the subcommittee that we will not rest until we have done that completely. And so that is still very much on our list. Part of doing that is doing that in an informed and evaluated way. And so as we continue in our third-party investigation, as we continue to make sure that we are making informed decisions and making complete decisions as we go forward, we will take in that information to make sure that we are understanding the full implications of the environmental responsibilities, of the water quality responsibilities, and others, to include what it means to do long-term testing, which we are evaluating through this process. And I'll turn it to Mr. Kramer if he has anything to add.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that, yes, if the department is not going to walk away from our requirements to clean up whatever the damage is done, and as Honorable Berger said, we're going to follow the science, and if it requires long-term treatment, we're going to do that. We'll use the circular process that we use in a lot of cases, and work through that long-term remediation process. Over.
Okay, thank you. I know I'm running out of time, so I'll save my second question if I get another chance, Mr. Chairman. Mahalo.
You will get another chance. Let me give the gavel order. Mr. Scott and Ms. Strickland will be the next up. We now turn to Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. And Undersecretary Kramer, what percentage of the energy that we use in the Department of Defense comes from the civilian power grid?
Yeah, it's almost virtually 100%. Yeah, it's just short of that, but we rely heavily on the local grid for the prime power. We've got backup sources, but yeah, primarily it's off the grid.
That's my understanding.
Except for remote areas, we've got still some power, like in Alaska, but yeah.
It's my understanding. It's in the range of 99% of the energy that we use on our DoD facilities comes from the civilian grid. There's been a lot of discussion about potential cyber attacks from Russia with everything that's going on in the Ukraine and their ability to make America pay. I'm concerned about the capabilities of the private sector, especially in the energy sector, to defend themselves against cyber attacks. If there were a cyber attack that shut down the energy at one of our installations, it shuts down a significant portion of our capabilities, even if we have backup generation. Well, what is being done to work with the private sector in the resilience in defense of cyber attacks?
So we've set up a CMMC process. It's a cyber maturity model we use for our defense industrial base, but it also has applicability to the grid. So we've got a website with all these links on that helps them out. And then the real trouble spot with any of the cyber attacks is if you think you've answered the mail, then you've really made yourself vulnerable to more attacks. And so it's a repetitive process. It's an education process.
It is.
Our CIO runs that, it's not within ANS or EI&E, but we work hand in glove on the facility-related control part of that. And
So the backup generation, is that predominantly generators that are powered by diesel?
It is a mix of fossil fuel generators. Some of them are microgrid. There's ones we're getting into large-scale battery power. As Honorable Berger said, there are ones at island where you have multiple sources of power that feed those microgrids, and in essence, that's why we do the the black start exercises so that we can test all those systems out to continue to operate absent a grid. So.
But the bottom line is diesel's dependable, and I'll just tell you, I'm concerned about our desires getting ahead of where the technology is. And Mr. Farnan, I know you spoke to this a little bit, and Mr. Waltz spoke to this as well, but when we talk about electrical tactical vehicles, those tactical vehicles have to be charged, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that technology is significantly into the future in which we would be able to move to electric tactical vehicles. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, and that's why in our strategy we put full electrification of tactical vehicles not till 2050.
Okay. Would you agree, even in 2050, some type of power supply has got to push forward?
Yes, sir. We have to, before we can have fully electric tactical vehicles, we have to figure out the problem of battlefield charging. And Army's Futures Command is working on that already.
I'm very concerned about the issue of battlefield charging. I don't mind telling you. I think that's a scenario in which you take out one, you take out all. Because if you take out the power generation, then you've taken out everything that is dependent upon that power generation in that battle. One last question, Mr. Oshiba, you spoke to the PFAS issue before. I represent both Moody and Robins Air Force Base in Georgia. Where are we in the cleanup of the contaminated areas, and what is needed to accelerate the process of the potential contaminations?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I don't have the details specifically to those two installations. I'd be happy to come back and provide you that information specific to those two. Overall, we have assessed all of our 204 installations. We have done preliminary assessments and site investigations for at least 2/3 of them, and we're following that CERCLA process in order to do the long-term cleanup.
Well, I look forward to any information on the two bases I represent. I do not believe that our testing is above what is recommended, but if it is, we certainly want to know and be a part of that solution. So I appreciate all of you, and I'm just very concerned that with everything going on in the world today, we don't let our need to win get ahead of where the technology is.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott. We now turn to Ms. Strickland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any specific questions at this time, but I thank you all for this very important discussion. And I would like to yield the balance of my time to my colleague from Hawaii, Kai Kahele.
Mr. Clay, your
Well,
turn.
mahalo, Mr. Chairman, and I sincerely appreciate the time yielded to me from my colleague. Thank you so much, Representative Strickland. I'll take this time to ask that second question I wanted to ask about Red Hill. And you know, as Secretary Berger and other members of the committee may also know, that in the bill, that the appropriations bill we passed last week included $736 million in new funding to continue to support the displaced service members, civilians, their family, to address the drinking water contamination, and to comply with the state of Hawaii's emergency order. This was in addition to $403 million in emergency funding that was obtained a few weeks ago, bringing the Congress's total funding for Red Hill for this current fiscal year alone to over $1.1 billion. We know that billions more will be required to complete all aspects of the cleanup, the stabilization, the defueling and closing of Red Hill, and the relocation of that fuel to other fuel storage capacity locations elsewhere throughout the Indo-PACOM AOR. And so my question is, in the Red Hill VI Act that was introduced, the Navy was required to reimburse the Honolulu Board of Water Supply and the Hawaii State Department of Health and Education for the enormous expenses that they have incurred as a result of this Red Hill fuel spill. I'll give you one example. The Red Hill Elementary School, which sits less than a mile from Red Hill, where several hundred elementary school students go to, in the ensuing weeks after the November fuel spill, started to see their toilets at the elementary school start to leak because the fuel in the water was eroding the seals in the toilets. And they had to change many of the toilets at Red Hill Elementary School. So there's a lot of expenses out there that have not been reimbursed to the State Department of Health, Education, and Board of Water Supply. Secretary Berger, do you believe that the Department of Defense is responsible for reimbursing the state of Hawaii and its associated state agencies and the Board of Water Supply for any costs associated with the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility water crisis?
Representative Cahaley.
Could also be for Mr. Kramer as well.
Representative Cahaley, I will not speak for the Department of Defense and leave some space for that portion, but thank you for raising these specific issues. We have been in constant communication with the Department of Health and others of the state to make sure that we are fully understanding what the costs are of Red Hill. And so this is one that I will make sure is one that we are all aware of and accounting for. As you said, this will be expensive in terms of the full remediation, and at this point, we likely don't know all of the costs that are associated, but this is another one that it is important to be aware of. It is on our list now. Thank you for raising it for me specifically. And it is one that we need to continue to pursue so that we understand fully all of the steps that we need to take to remediate the harm that was caused by the contamination of the water.
Yeah, if I might.
Thank you for that answer. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Kramer.
Yeah, I'll just emphasize, so we've got a well-documented process to go through claims and reimbursements, and I think they're on the cusp of kind of going through what is the next step of remediation activities when you get beyond the initial blush and you get into the seals and the rest of those, as you know, petroleum breaks down petroleum. So some of those things aren't going to be known for several months, and we've got a process, and we have processes in place that'll address those over time.
Yeah, it may be very probable that we may never bring the Red Hill well back online to serve the Navy's water system, which removes over 10 million gallons of fresh water from the NWS. We may need to drill new drinking water wells or to establish new monitoring wells in that area. The Board of Water Supply is already calling for water conservation efforts for individuals in the affected area and also to plan for water restrictions during the summer. So this is something that clearly is not going away. We are still distributing water at the Pearl Harbor Navy Exchange. I saw it with my own eyes the other day. So I just want to make everyone aware that this has not gone away and it's still an ongoing crisis in Hawaii. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my colleague from Washington State for the time. I really appreciate it.
Mr. Clay, just one more comment here. The military will do what the law requires. And if you want to write the law, if you get the support of Congress, then the military will carry it out. So we'll keep that in mind as your legislation proceeds. The gavel order is now Mr. Moore and Ms. McLean. Mr. Moore, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Waltz. Mr. Kramer, I'm going to ask a question to you first on an update on where we are with respect to answering the requirement laid out in Section 2679 authority. And I don't give those out lightly. I will explain a little bit and provide some context. I don't expect every bylaw of everything ever done in the NDAA to be fully on at the ready, but I was given some advice by, I won't name him personally, but the chair of this committee, of this subcommittee, to keep up my passion about what we can do with our deteriorating facilities and to keep up my passion about military housing. There are private sector solutions, there are community-based solutions that can compensate for the lack of MILCON funding that we have. And we need to be willing to engage in this. And I'm really, really passionate about it, and I'm going to continue to push on it. And that's what this is regards to. Section 2679 authority written into the NDAA allows DOD to enter into agreements with communities non-competitively. Colloquially, we use the term IGSA authority or Intergovernmental Support Authority. Again, we were able to put this into the NDAA that can accelerate construction and the repair of deteriorated facilities and infrastructure at our military installations. It requires the Secretary of Defense to present options to address scoring limitations associated with these provisions and additional options to expand this 2679 authority. Thoughts on this, updates on this, and any thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I'm familiar with the IGSA authority 2679 and used extensively within the military departments and quite well with services, and we just started in the cusp of construction, and I'll leave it up to them to get into the details. But if there's a need within the community or the installation to expand the authority, we're all on board. I don't know that we would stand in the way. I know there's been recent updates to extend from 5 years to 10 years. If we got to go to 20 years, in a lot of cases, when you look to finance construction, you want a longer period of time so you can reduce those annual payments. And so if if the period of performance has to increase, I think we're on board with that too.
So are on board with extending that period? Because I know that's what some of our local communities are hoping for, from 1 to even 10 years.
Yeah, because that's the only way you're going to get the financing. They're going to be able to finance is through a longer period. And I'll leave it up to them.
Mr. Shiba, thoughts at all you want to share?
Thank you, Congressman. We would be supportive of any proposal to extend the time frame. I think that's one of the things we've seen in terms of limitations of using the IGSA authority. As Mr. Kramer pointed out, some of those arrangements require just a longer period of payback.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'll take the chairman's advice again on putting this into law and following up on this. I think there's an enormous amount of appetite out there in our communities that serve these bases and building that connection. Let me continue on. Affordable housing crisis across the nation. It's obvious. In Utah alone, 43% increase just in last year. Mr. Oshiba, I represent Hill Air Force Base, but I think this is very consistent across the country. 70% of military members and their families live off military installations. They move every few years. They receive a basic allowance for housing that does not keep up with rent prices. Consequently, many of our military members are now having to live great distances from their duty station and pay much more than they get in their BAH. Understanding the current Air Force policy is to rely on the local community to satisfy these shortfalls. Can you tell me how you plan to partner with communities around Hill Air Force Base to identify needs and develop a plan together?
Thank you very much for your question, Congressman. So coincidentally enough, I had a chance to meet with the Utah Defense Alliance earlier this month during the Association of Defense Communities. We actually talked at great lengths about different opportunities that we could partner moving forward. It is currently our policy to rely on the communities for housing in the off the installation. But I can understand and clearly see some of the issues regarding specific locations that have experienced either housing shortages or increases in costs, particularly over the past couple of years. There are processes in place within the Department of Defense to adjust basic allowance for housing entitlements, but even given that, I do think there's an opportunity for us to partner more closely with these communities. Utah is one. Up in Fairbanks, Alaska is another, and we actually discussed that with them as well. And we did commit to continuing that discussion and see what kind of opportunities that we can forge going forward.
Thank you. I know it's one of the most pressing needs for our families to be able to help cover some of these gaps. You mentioned Utah Defense Alliance. They've been incredible to work with, but the Utah Farm Bureau steps in and just provided a full day of service to provide some of that gap that they're even experiencing food shortages. So this is something we've got to be able to address. And I will, my time is up.
Congressman, if I would just add, it's the department's policy that it's community first, and it's the way it's been, not just the Air Force, to make sure we clarify that. And so the other.
Very good.
The other item.
Mr. Moore, I'm going to call a little gavel down on us.
Yep.
I know Mr. Walsh, I know that you're going to have to leave momentarily. If you'd like to make another comment or question, and then I'll turn to Representative McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield to Ms. McLean so we can get her question as before votes.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Oshiba, Selfridge Air National Guard Base obviously is in my district and has been competing for the future basing of next generation fighters aircraft mission. Securing this mission would ensure Selfridge remains active, ongoing component of our overall national defense. When being reviewed for these new missions, however, the base scores incredibly well in a number of areas. However, a decision in 1979, when the base still was controlled by the Air Force, allowed for construction to occur in the clear zone to the south of the runway. For the past 2 mission attempts by Selfridge, the encroachment issue has been a key deciding factor for the base not being awarded the mission. My question is this: why is the Air Force not willing to recognize that a single-engine fighter aircraft, the F-16, were allowed to operate previously at Selfridge, essentially being grandfathered into the encroachment concerns, but now Selfridge is told this is a barrier that prohibits Air Force from selecting the base for any next-generation fighter aircrafts like the F-35s? We seem to be at Selfridge always the bridesmaid, never the bride, and this seems to be, you know, the issue that everyone hangs their hat on, and we'd just like some answers.
Thank you very much for the question, Congresswoman. I'm not familiar with that specific issue in terms of construction in a clear zone. I do know that's a safety of flight issue that we take seriously. There are different remedies to that we could explore, perhaps.
But we let the F-35 or the F-16, but not the F-35.
Yeah, Congresswoman, I'll have to take that for the record and come back with a more specific response to that specific situation.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. My second question would be, in layman's terms, as much as possible, what does Selfridge need to actually do to be considered for a next-gen fighter aircraft mission? I get, every time I ask this question, I get the runaround. And if we're never going to be the bride, just be honest with us so we can take our focus somewhere else. But really, what do we need to do to prepare ourselves to actually secure a flying mission?
Congresswoman, that's probably something I would love to sit down with you and discuss. You know, I think you're familiar with our strategic basing process and the criteria that we use in order to evaluate candidates for a new mission.
But the issue for us, and the frustration part for us, with all due respect, sir, is it changes. So I would welcome the opportunity to sit down and talk with you on both of those questions, because again, the community gets excited, you know, the base gets excited, and then the rules of the game change. And although I'm not happy about not having a flying mission, that's clearly what we want. I think we need to have some honest and tough answers and some honest and tough dialogue on Selfridge Air Force Base. Because for far too long, like I said, we're just tired of being the bridesmaid, never the bride. And we got to change that. Or we got to move directions differently.
Ma'am, we pride ourselves on the fact that the strategic basing process should be clear, transparent, and consistent. And apparently, we have not communicated that well with you.
You
and
have
that's something we will strive towards. And again, if it means that I need to come and sit down with you and walk you through some of those specific to that flying mission, I'd be happy to do that.
I'm here all week. Thank you, sir. With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. McLean. I believe we've run through all of the questions from the members. If that is incorrect, let me know or let the staff know. With regard, Mr. Moore, your issue on housing is on all of our minds. With regard to privatized housing or on base, there is this little problem called scoring. And until we figure out how to deal with scoring, where the Budget Committee seems to think that a privatized program somehow is a cost to the military, we're going to have to figure that out and get past that. Otherwise, we're not going to make much progress. But your legislation will be of great assistance in that. Mr. Kalehi, carry on, write the law, get the president to sign it, and I'll guarantee that the military will follow along to provide whatever support the state of Hawaii and the communities need there. We'll work with you on that. There are a series of other questions that we didn't get to at this hearing, but we're definitely going to follow up. I do want to comment on the issue that Mr. Scott raised, having to do with the question of electrical power being available in the field. Absolutely appropriate question. The same thing applies to petroleum energy. And you might talk to the Russians about why their convoy was so long held up. The general thought is that it was for lack of fuel. And so, Mr. Walsh, you raised this question at the outset, and that too is part of this equation. Going forward, I want to, before I close it up, I don't know of any other member that has not had an opportunity, and Mr. Walsh has now left the committee. So with that, I want to thank our witnesses. Mr. Kramer, thank you very much for overseeing the departments and their efforts to deal with the energy, the installation issues, and also the environmental issues, all of which have been brought to the attention of the committee today. Mr. Farnham, thank you for leading, providing the pacing for your fellow departments, and we'll let them catch up to the Army on the energy installation and the climate strategies that they will follow along. You've given them the pacing threat. Ms. Berger, thank you. You're very forthcoming to answer Mr. Kalehi's questions. There are a host of others that we'll come back to you on that are in that I have been plagued with, like what in the world are we going to do with the public shipyards, and when will we get them up to date, and also the Navy's ability to properly schedule the availability in those shipyards. Mr. Oshiba, I still don't know why we rebuilt a facility that we know is going to get slammed again. You provided some detail in your testimony about the two bases that we mentioned earlier today, and we'll want to follow that along. And for all of you, as we go forward on the installations, think about energy conservation. A 1% decrease in the fuel consumption by the Department of Defense takes 70,000 cars off the road of America. So there are thoughts here that we can pursue. With that, I want to thank the witnesses. I want to thank the participation of the committee. Particularly want to thank Jeannie, who I see sitting there at the dais. Thank you so very much for the staff work that went into this, both minority and majority staff. Thank you. And with that, this hearing is ended. Thank you so very much.
Mahalo.
Bye now.